Yep. Um, Hello guys. Thanks a lot for joining today's tutorial on landscape photography. And a special thanks to ARC for giving spotlight opportunity to us. Before I introduce myself, I will take some time to introduce our club if you really don't know about it. We are a photography club of UNSW and we do various activities such as workshop to teach you basics of camera to the editing part. We have outing to let you apply what you have learned. Then we have tutorial. That's what we are doing today. It targets specific type of photography. And if you are a member of the club, we let you learn our club's equipments. We have multiple camera, lens, and many more. Now let me introduce our panel for today. Hello, my name is Nishant, and I'm the events manager of the club. I started my photography in 2015. I started only with my iPhone 6 and did it on iPhone for more than 2 years. My interest genres are travel, landscape, and recently started aerial photography. Equipments I use are Sony Alpha 6000, Sigma 35mm f1.8, which is a prime lens, and my zoom lens, which is Sony 55 to 210 and DJI Mavic Mini. Now, answer.
All right, thank you, Nish. So I'm Anson, UNS Photo Club Information Manager. So I love photography, I love videography, and of course I love to travel. So that's why I'm here today to introduce you about landscape photography. So you can also follow my Instagram. And this is the equipment that I use because I do photography and videography. So I have some equipment that's for videography as well. So now let's introduce our third host of today, Shadab. Shadab, can you say a few words? So what we are going to talk about today is first we'll introduce landscape photography, and then we'll talk about some recommended settings, as well as other equipments and some tips for that. And lastly, we're going to have a Lightroom demonstration about how to editing a landscape photography. So first of all, let's talk about what is landscape photography. So landscape photography is basically that photos that you take outdoor. Mainly it's about nature. It can be mountains, it can be sea, it can be a lake, it can be forest, or maybe with some man-made features like city, urban, skyscrapers, and much more. And of course, it can be a combination of both. Just like this photo, there's a town in the valley, and also there's mountains, there's sea, and also sky. So how to use camera in terms of settings? Basically, idea is that you have to be quite flexible. So the shutter speed varies. It depends on your subject and genre. If it's night photography, then your shutter speed will be much longer. For ISO, basically just keep it as minimum as possible to reduce the noise produced by high ISO. So in terms of mode, it can be pretty much any mode. It can be auto, it can be manual, it can be aperture priority or um, shutter speed priority. So everything is fine. Even though you use a phone, is okay as well. And for focus, it can be in autofocus or in manual focus. So it depends on the situation. If your camera has a more reliable autofocus, basically you can keep it on autofocus most of the time. So for aperture, I would say it's from f5.6 to 11. The sharpness is the best for most of the lens. Of course, it depends on the situation. You don't have to always follow that. And basically, what you have to do is be flexible. So for white balance, I would say just at auto white balance. The reason why I'm recommending to use auto is because the white balance keeps changing. So it's better if you just set on auto and just have less thing to worry about. In terms of exposure value, it will be from -1 to 0. Sometimes if you want to, we want to preserve the detail in highlight, we may just slightly underexpose the photo so that we can keep the details in highlight like clouds to be correctly exposed. And but anyway, correct exposure is very important no matter what kind of photography you're doing. So make it simple is that you have to be flexible, you have to be creative, and be comfortable. So just don't stuck on the recommended setting we have just taught now. Basically, landscape is a very wide genre, and then there's a lot of this kind, different kind of situation. So you have to adjust according to your situation. So talking about subjects, these are just some ideas that you can take off, like sequels, forests and parks, lake, river, and waterfall. And for example, this photo, I use ND filter to slow down the shutter speed. So even though in daylight, the shutter speed can be quite slow to capture the movement of the waterfall to create the motion blur and to prevent that the waterfall is overexposed and we have lost the details of the water. It can be lake. Maybe you can capture rainbow and waterfall, of course, or even stream in forest. Not only the subjects that I talk about, but also mountains and glacier. And city and urban, basically you can go up the hill in the day or in the evening, and then you can capture the landscape of city. Or even inside some cities with using wide angle lens and capture the overall environment of the city. And of course, in Sydney, we can go to Milson's Pond or Miss Macquarie's Chair to capture the nightscape and of Sydney. And also for rural area and village, maybe some wide shot or maybe a little bit tighter about the village. And area is another option. Like this one, I was riding on a helicopter. So this photos was taken from a helicopter. Maybe on planes as well, where you are landing, maybe you can capture some beautiful sceneries. Or even on the plane, maybe sunrise, sunset during your long haul flight. Of course, sunrise and sunset is the best timing for landscape photography, just like this one. And in the evening, maybe astro photography would be something that you can think of. You can capture the sceneries as well as the stars in the skies. So now I'm going to pass the time to Nish to talk about the equipments.
So for the equipments, yes, usually equipments are expensive, but I'm not here to demotivate you. That's why I have categorized it into two parts: starter pack and the advanced pack. If you see yourself somewhere from beginners to intermediate, then I would highly recommend you guys to use starter pack for landscape photography. But if you see yourself above intermediate, then go for advanced pack. Uh, Equipments are just the handy tool. It's not a must, but it will improve the quality of your photo. As I have said earlier, that I did my photography on iPhone 6, and now we have so much better cameras on phone than what we used to have. So if you are buying camera for first time, consider using phone sometime, and then understand your style, and then invest on cameras. If you do, directly buy DSLR, you will just get overwhelmed in learning how to use it and lose the perspective that a good photos are not how clear or how many pixels it has, but good photo is a good idea. So these are the category I have listed. I will go through the starter pack first. Camera doesn't mean DSLR. Just use anything you have. Go out and practice. Wide angle lenses. There are lenses for phone as well, but your camera lens is already wide enough in the phone, so there is no need to buy anything new. But if you're using DSLR, you don't have any wide angle lens, then you should consider buying one for yourself. Normally, the kit lens you get with the camera is perfect to start with because they are usually in this range. Then we have to. So just go online or anywhere, buy a cheap tripod for your starter, and there are many tripod in the market. But go for any tripod at this stage. Why tripod? Glad you asked. So a good habit to develop in landscape photography is long exposure. Long exposure is keeping your camera shutter open for a few seconds so it captures the movement of clouds or water if you are taking photo of waterfall. But if you go for advanced pack, then buy a zoom lens. I will show you. I will show you in next few slides the difference it makes using zoom lens and filters. Then expensive tripod, but why expensive tripod and shutter release? So in my personal experience, what I found was that I used to use cheap Amazon tripod, and I was blank that why I'm getting these blurry photos. I found out that when I press the shutter button to take photos, it shakes my camera, and I thought let's buy the remote. Remotes are usually cheap, like $30 or something. It improved my photo a lot, but still it was shaky. And what I realized that my tripod was so bad that even a slight wind can shake it. So having a good steady tripod is a good investment. And shutter remote is not only for avoiding the shake, but it's also helpful to take long exposure, such as 1 minute or more than 1 minute. Whereas many camera doesn't allow you to go more than 30 seconds. Then have some additional batteries. It's a quite underestimated statement, but trust me, you don't want to be like me when you trek 3 hours and take photos all along the way. But when you reach the lookout, you are just out of the batteries. Now, let's look at some example of zoom lens filters. So on the left side, we have wide angle lens. You can see there is nothing wrong, but most of the area is covered by surface and hiding the more important subjects of the photo. On the right side, we have a zoom lens. Zoom lens makes everything close to each other. What I mean is, photo on the right, the mountain is far from the surface, but if you use zoom lens, it makes mountain close to the surface and magnified, which apparently looks good. And you won't be able to achieve this wide angle with the wide angle lens. With using ND filters. ND filters, you can see photo on the left is normal and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you try to increase the shutter speed, it will get overexposed. So we use ND filter here. ND filter is just like a sunglasses for camera. It blocks the light to come in and lets you take long exposure. And if you didn't know what long exposure looks like, then the photo on the right is long exposure. It means that you can take photos for a few seconds and capture the moment of subject for this elite cloud. The polarized filter. Polarized filter is an expensive sunglasses for your camera. If you go to buy sunglasses, you will see there are some sunglasses saying it is polarized. What it means is that they have a layer of filter to cancel out the noise in the light. Yes, there is noise in the light as well, which results in capturing faded photo. Photo on the left is without the polarized filter, but on the right it is with the filter. And straight away you can see that the clouds, the color of the clouds are popped drastically. If you ever buy a polarized filter, try it near sea and ocean, because near sea and ocean, light reflects a lot and creates a really bad noise, and it gives you a very bad photo. So now I will tell you equipments that I'm using and why I like them for landscape photography and travel photography. So I use Sony Alpha 6000, which is a budget-friendly camera. Sony's cameras are very light and handy. That's what I like about this, because I shoot travel, landscape, and I don't want to walk kilometers carrying heavy camera equipment. Then I use Sigma 30mm prime lens. Many of the people are shocked when they listen that I use prime lens for this, but I really like it for landscape, and this lens is capable of very sharp images for landscape and portraits. Then I have Sony 55-210mm zoom lens, which is a decent quality and can zoom to see film zone as well. As a zoom lens, the quality it gives it's very cheap for the price. Then the additional equipments I use is like I have shutter, remote shutter for long exposure, which is on left. In the middle is my ND filter, and on the right is my additional batteries. Then I have Manfrotto tripod, which is very steady and it gives me really good shots of long exposures. This is my recent purchase. It's a cheap drone, but it's really small, handy, and obviously additional batteries. Obviously, I have additional batteries with it, and I tried drawing Sydney on my drone. As you can see that I'm using all budget option, and on the same time I got all small and light stuff because I travel a lot, and this fits my profile. And I won't be able to realize importance of light too if I go for the impulsive buying when I was using iPhone 6 only for my photography. So I would really highly recommend that take your time, see what fits you, and then invest in cameras. Now, I will discuss the basic tips. These are very straightforward tips, and I always use it. I will always use it. These 5 tips have gave me really good photos. Some of the examples are this. This photo is taken from my drone. It's in Parsley Bay in Sydney. This is a photo of Egypt during sunset, and this is I think the first 10 photo I took from my DSLR. This is a photo of Sydney in Miss Macquarie Park. I shot this on my Sigma prime lens. So let's jump into the 5 tips that I think so you should follow, and you will be able to get some good shot. Use large f-stop. This is my number 1 tip. Use higher f-stop. This will result in sharp photos even for subject far from you. The logic of f-stop is that if you put your smaller f-stop, it will only focus on the object closer to you, and it will blur out the object far from you. So it's a really good practice for landscape photography to use large enough, probably more than 8. Then have a focal point in your photo. Anson has already discussed this, that have a subject in your photo. And it's really important to have a subject in your photo. It can be anything, a person, a building, a sun. Having a right lens. We have already discussed about this, that how a different lens can result in different photo. So before going to the place, do your research, see how it looks like, and choose what lens to carry with you. Then have an idea of the right time of the day. Try to go in golden hour, because that time lights are soft and even all around the sky, and it won't give you any harsh subject in your photo. This is a very usual mistake done by amateur photographer, and it's a very underestimated statement, that straight your horizon. Amateur photographer tends to take photo in some angle. Try to avoid it, and you can fix it in editing, but you might lose important area of your photo even after the post editing. Now, I will show you some demonstration of the tips I have told you, like how I will demonstrate how those tips matter and how to use them.
We are here for the landscape photography tips that I told you earlier. So we are gonna put our tricks in the practice right now. So let's jump into it. Our first tip is that push up your f-stop. So for now, what I'm gonna do, that I'm gonna switch on my camera and put my camera in the completely automatic mode, and just take a photo of the city from here. Right, straight away I can say that the view of our city is not sharp enough. The buildings are not sharp enough, and the reason behind it is that our f is not large enough. Because if we're using smaller f, it just only focuses on the closer object, not the further object. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my camera in the aperture priority mode now. So the difference between automatic and aperture priority is that in automatic your camera decides everything, but in aperture priority you have a control over aperture, but camera decides every other thing. So my camera is in aperture priority mode, and I'm gonna put my f-stop at around 8. I'm gonna take one photo of city again. We can just compare right now that the Binfield Tower is much more sharper than the one we got earlier with the smaller f-stop. So it's a good practice to use larger f-stop when you are taking landscape photography. So our second tip is that find a focal point. What focal point means is that have a subject in your photo. Right now we are doing the cityscape photography, which is a type of landscape photography. So our subject is city, but we have to make a good composition. I'm gonna try to take some photo, and let's see which one is good. So in our first photo, we can see that there's quite a lot of distraction, and our city is kind of faded away because I'm using aperture priority mode and other things are on auto, and that's what the camera is supposed to do, to keep everything in the natural lighting. In the second photo, we have like lots of distraction, like other buildings and trees. What I like about the third photo is that we have only sky and city, and sky is occupying the massive area in our photo, which kind of shows that it's a negative spacing landscape photography. Our third tip is that choosing the right lens. Right now I'm using Sigma 30mm 1.4, and it's a quite good lens for portraiture and travel, and sometimes I use it as a wide angle lens for landscape photography. But for now, as you can see that the city is quite far from us, so I'm gonna change my lens to zoom lens. So now I have switched my lens to 55 to 210 mm, and it's a zoom lens. So I think so we will be able to get some good shot of the city. So I will try to take a good shot of the city now with this lens. As you can see, by using zoom lens, we are capturing so much detail of the Winfield Tower, City Bank building, and which was quite far in the wide angle lens. So there is a huge advantage of using telephoto lens sometimes. So having a right lens at the right location is really necessary. So our fourth tip is that choosing the right time. As you can see now, it's a sunset time, and there are two golden hours in a day. One is sunrise and sunset. I really like sunrise because there's not many people and I can take the photo freely. So now you can. I will show you one photo right now of the city I will take right now of the during the sunset time, and you can see that the lights are really soft at this moment, and the photo will turn out to be good. As you can see in this, the city is perfectly lit at this moment because we are at the golden hour. The sun is setting, and I would really recommend you guys to take landscape photography during the golden hour, which is 15 minutes before and after the sunset and sunrise. So our last step is to straight up the horizon. So what this mistake is done by usually amateur photographer. Um, the mistake is that they usually don't focus on taking the photo straight to the horizon. They usually take at some angle because they don't pay attention to the details. And the cost of doing this is that when they try to fix it in the post editing, such as in Lightroom, they usually lose the important information of their photo, important area of the photo. So I'm going to show you the extreme case of this scenario, and I'm going to fix it in the Lightroom, and I'm going to show you that sometimes taking photo in a tilted way is not good for you, good habit. As you can see that I took this photo and it's extreme case of rotation, but you can see in Lightroom that when I will be editing this photo that we have lost the building on the left side. Now there are some additional tips that I really like to share with you. So first one is that to choose when and where to go. So for this, I really like the app All Trail. So this app tells you all the trekking paths in Sydney and all around the world, and it even has the option for looking at the photos of what people have taken. The other app I really like is PhotoPill. So PhotoPill, it's like it tells you how the natural light will be at that time. You can save the spot at the when you are supposed to visit there, and you can check over the weather, light, clouds over the time there for your safe location. So another additional tip is a combination of rule of third and including the people in your frame is sometimes really good landscape photography. I took this photo 2 days ago in Dudley's Page Reserve, and you can see in this that the photographer is on the cross section of the grid, which is called rule of third. And in this, you can see that the photographer is taking the photo of city, which this kind of looks really good because there is a person in the photo and as well the city. So in this, we have a subject as a person. My next additional tip is to use histogram for landscape photography. The reason why to use histogram for the landscape photography is that sometimes you are taking photo in a very bright situation, and your monitors are not that good to like you can see a good details in the photo. just through the screen of your camera. So at this point, I really like to use histogram. So histogram is just a graph, which you can see here. What it tells is that if most part of your graph is on the left side, which means that the photo is dark, and if it's on the right side, then this means that the photo is bright. Uh, our aim is to keep the all the content in the middle of the graph, which shows that the picture is perfectly exposed. So that's all for today, guys. I hope you really learned something from this demonstration. Now I will hand over to Anson for the advanced tips for the landscape photography.
Okay, thank you, Nis. So now I'm going to talk about the composition technique. So basically, a landscape photo, if you want to be a good one, you can be in multiple layers. It can be in foreground, midground, and background. So as you can see in this photo, the, the water reflection will be the foreground, and the midground will be the rock and the lighthouse, and the background will be the sky and the trees behind. And the rules of third. So you can divide the image to using two horizontal and two vertical lines, and then you can make sure that the subject is along the line or at the intersection point. So they will be in at the red spot or the line that you can see here. So leading line. So because our eye is naturally just being drawn towards the line, so the lines can just tell us into the picture or towards the subject. So we'll just show you some example later on. So here you can see that the Sydney on the left picture, that you can see the Sydney Harbour Bridge just draws our vision towards the CBD. And on the right hand side, you can see the road down there is just drawing us our vision towards the arrow. And it's a bit special for this one, but I just want to talk about it. It is can be applied in Beijing. Basically, this is the central axis of the whole city. So you can see that the central axis, just because I'm just standing in the central axis, and I just take the photos towards a direction. So you can see that everything, buildings, roads are basically from a straight line, and you can just see your vision will just go straight forward from the bottom to somewhere far away. And also you make use of symmetry. So you can, from left hand side, you can see that everything is just symmetrical. And on the right hand side, it's basically similar, but it's basically a night version that you can take a reference of. And then when you are doing landscape photography, that you know, okay, this is a technique that I can use. But it doesn't mean that you must use the techniques I talk about. You can you can choose to use it or not, but it's just that something that may help you to deal with your composition. And also reflection, like maybe a peaceful lake or sea. So it will show better if the water is peaceful. Because if it's windy, then you cannot see the reflection clearly. So same for these two. And maybe frame within a frame. So maybe you have an object that maybe an R or door or something, a barrier, and then there's a hole inside, and then you can just see through the hole to make another frame. So another tips that I'm going to share with you is panorama. You have to do something in post-production, as well as you have to plan when you're shooting. So basically, you take few photos from left to right and then combine them in post-production. So usually, one photo will overlap with another photo. So if I have a photo here, the next photo will just overlap with my previous one for 1/3 of the part, and then you keep going. So then when you go back home, when you turn on your computer and do the editing, the computer knows that they can overlap together and do the photo editing. We will be having a demonstration later on, and these are just some examples. Basically, panorama, if you are using, let's say 24 mm standard lens or wide lens, basically, if you merge few photos, you can just create a very wide view so that it's just wider than, let's say, a fish eye or something. So it is another technique that you can use. But the cons is that when you share on social media, it may not be able to display correctly because the photo is just like a long rectangular shape. So it can be applied to day night, it can be applied to day or night, it can be applied using your camera, or maybe the one above. Actually, it was taken using my phone, and then I do it in Lightroom. So even you're using phone, that's not a problem. So now I will pass the time to Shadab, and he will be doing the Lightroom demonstration.
So Lightroom is the preferred software that the majority of photographers use because it's a very adaptable software. You can use Lightroom from many different camera manufacturers such as Nikon, Canon, Sony. Even you can use your phone to edit a lot of photos. And that's why Lightroom is great. If you're using Fuji cameras, I personally recommend you use Capture One because they have a different technology that they use for their cameras. So Capture One is more suited for that. For all other cameras, I recommend you guys use Lightroom. So Lightroom is great for photo editing, and if you want to use Lightroom, what I recommend you do is go to the UNSW website, and they have a student plan available, so you can get the whole Adobe suite for a very discounted price. So when you first open Lightroom, you'll see that there's different tabs on the top right, and also the panels that you can see here. The main tabs that we normally use for Lightroom is the library and develop module. So the library is where you see all your photos and where you can organize all your photos. And the develop module is where we're going to do a lot of our editing. And the rest of these five, we don't really use it that much. So for the library module, you can see that these are all our photos. On the left here, this is where we can see where the photos are stored. So for my tutorial here, these photos are stored in the Lightroom raw surface folder in my local disk. If you have multiple disks, you'll have C, D, E, F, etc., etc. And also with the photos, a great thing about Lightroom is that there's two functions Lightroom in my opinion. The first function, as I said, is editing, but the second function is organization of photos. And this is one of my favorite aspects of Lightroom. So for example, every time I import photos, I can actually put in a name, like in my metadata about the photo, and then I can filter my photos depending on it. So I can have portraiture photos, I can have birthday photos, or I can have landscape photos, and I can just filter depending on that. Another great thing about Lightroom is that you can filter depending on the year you've taken it in, so the specific date, or you can take it depending on your camera, so you have the cameras here, and also you can look at it depending on the lens you have. So that's great in terms of filtering. So let's get into the editing aspect. Now, before we get into editing, I'll just show you one quick thing is how do I import photos? So these photos have already been imported for your convenience, but I'll show you how to get it from your phone or your camera onto Lightroom. So you press the import. Now, in the import dialog box on the left-hand side, we have the source. So this is where all your photos are. And then this is where you're going to see the photos that you've taken when you click them. So if I click my downloads folder, it's showing all the photos that are in my downloads folder. And on the right-hand side is where we can see the destination, so where our photos are going to go. There's four main options you can choose. You can convert your raw photos as a DNG, which is a standardized raw file. You can copy your photos, which means that it'll stay in the original place, but it'll also create another copy on your destination, or you can move photos, so transferring from your source to your destination. So there's different settings you can choose for importing. So building previews. A key thing to remember about Lightroom is that it is a non-destructive process. So when you're doing any editing in Lightroom, you're not actually changing the original file. You're changing, for example, let's say a layer on top of the original file. And the quality of the layer will be dependent on these. So you have the minimal, embedded, and sidecast, standard 1-to-1. The higher the standard you pick, the longer the time it will take for you to import your pictures. The second option is you can build smart previews. Smart previews are basically Lightroom will create a second highly compressed file alongside your original file, which essentially means that if you're connecting your hard drive to Lightroom and you're putting all your pictures onto a hard drive, if you disconnect that hard drive from your computer, then you can still edit the files on Lightroom. So that's what Smart Previews enables you to do. And this is what I always click here. Don't import suspected duplicates. It just keeps my catalog clean. I don't have double up of images, which is great. Another great feature of importing is that you can make a second copy. So you can make a second copy to a second hard drive at the same time. So that saves you a lot of time in backing up files, which I highly recommend. So at least have 2 minimum backups. So my theory is that if a 1 terabyte hard drive costs $60, it actually costs you $120 because you want to buy 2 for backup purposes. Then when we go into the destination settings, here we can choose where you want to put our files. So for example, I like to put it into a main file. So let's say Lightroom 2020. And then when I pick Lightroom 2020, I click include subfolder. Then I want to put my month. So let's say 9th of the 25th. So that's the date where I've taken it. You want your month first, then the date for ordering purposes. And then whatever you want to say, let's say landscape tutorial. So that's the name of the event. And then I put it into the subfolder. So that ensures that all your pictures are very well organized, which I highly recommend you do when you first start off. Don't be like me because when I first used Lightroom, I just imported all the pictures and I didn't do any of these organization stuff. And it took me hours and hours to fix everything up. So that's the import function done for you. So let's go and do a live edit. So I'll click the image, go to develop, and we'll start doing the edits. So when you first see a RAW file, don't be scared because this is basically what your RAW camera sensor sees. It doesn't do any processing, which we'll be doing by ourselves. So when we're looking at photo editing, one of the things I want to focus on is the histogram. The histogram really tells us a lot about the image. What are the issues with the image and what needs to be fixed? So in our scenario here, what's happening is that we have a lot of information in the blacks and shadows, which is here. It's very dark in the foreground. And then we also have a lot of information here in the whites and highlights, which means that our sky is too bright. So we want to be fixing that in our image. So after we have an idea what we want to fix about, we look at the composition. What do we like about the image? What we do not like about the image. So what do I like about this image? I like about the image the fact that it's a bit of blurriness in the foreground. Because this was taken in a train, it kind of emphasizes the movement aspect of the image. But what I don't like about the image is the reflection. Because this was taken through a window, we can see the reflection at the top of the image. So to fix that composition, what I'm going to do is click the crop overlay tool. And the crop overlay tool, what I'm simply going to do is move it down like so. And that's going to get rid of the reflection and it gives a much better aspect ratio in terms of landscape photography. Now, after I've done my composition adjustments, I'm going to go down into lens correction. Now, what a lot of people do is they actually do their edits and then go to lens correction, but I'll show you what happens. So let's say I click this. You see here that the whole exposure of the image changes. So after I've done all the desired edits, and if I go down to here and click the lens correction, the image will change to what I didn't originally anticipate. So I always go down and click lens correction. So what does lens correction actually do? So let's see. So when I enable profile correction, we can see that there's a bit of barrel distortion in the image, which is being corrected. It's being flattened by the software. So we can see it's being flattened by the software. But another thing, why does these values change? This is because it's actually increasing the exposure on the corners. So this is an issue called vignetting, and which means that the corners are darker than they're supposed to be. So if I enable lens correction, we see the corners becoming brighter. The next thing I always do is remove chromatic aberrations. This is irrespective of the image I take. Clicking this option, it doesn't hurt your image in any way. It only benefits it. So what is chromatic aberration? Well, chromatic aberration is the green fringing around objects. So when I click remove chromatic aberration, we can see that the green fringing has been removed by this setting. And I always do this for safe practice. So after I've completed the lens correction, I'm going to be moving on to the main setting area. Now, the first setting that you can change is white balance. So white balance talks about how warm or cool your image is. So the more to the left I move, the more cooler the image, the more to the right I move, the more warmer the image. So I'll show you. So you can see it's getting very cool, very blue, and more right is getting very orange and warm. Now, everything I'm talking here is personal preference. After you do some practice, you will like some things more than me, and it's just depending on what you prefer. So for me, I think the white balance on this image is absolutely perfect, so nothing to change about that. Now I'm going to look at the exposure next. As I already mentioned, the sky is way too bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move down the exposure. So that means the sky is better now. But then what the issue with that is that the foreground is too dark. And that's where my highlights and shadows sliders come in. For majority of landscape photos, I want to move my highlights all the way down so the sky is preserved and move my shadows all the way up. And then my foreground is preserved like that. And then the image looks a bit flat here, but that's going to be improved later on. So after I move down my highlights all the way down and on my shadows all the way up, next I'm going to look at whites and blacks. Now, there's two ways of adjusting your whites and blacks. The first is what you do is called the technical adjustment, which is a theoretically correct way of adjusting your whites and blacks. And the second is by personal preference. So for the technical adjustment slash the correct way of doing it, you want to be pressing Control Shift on a Windows computer and double clicking whites. And your software will automatically do the technical adjustment. Same for blacks, Control Shift, double click blacks, and it will do the automatic technical adjustment for blacks. Now, what if I want to do it myself? Now, the best way to judge the correct white and black settings is to press Alt on your computer and then move the slider. As you can see, it's completely black. So I want to move it to a specific place where there is no clipping, which is some white areas in the image. So I'm going to move it to the right, and wait until it starts to clip. As we can see, the mountaintops are starting to clip, so I'm going to move back a bit, and that's really nice for me. So that's plus 26 of white, press Alt again, then go for blacks. For blacks, it's really personal preference, but I like a bit of depth in my image, so a bit of clipping is okay. So here you can see the trees, there's a bit of clipping in the trees, and for me, I like that. It gives it more depth to your landscape images. So I've done the whites and blacks, highlight, shadows, and exposure. Then I'm going to go into the presence section. Now here is the section where I'm going to improve the contrast of my image. There's two key sliders I want you guys to focus on. It's clarity and dehaze. What these tools basically do is they add contrast to the image, but they also increases the perceived sharpness of the image. So it makes your image pop out a bit more. So clarity, it basically increases contrast. As we can see, the shadows and then the highlights will move apart a bit as I move this to the right. And then dehaze does the same thing, but dehaze is more useful for the sky. So I like a value between 5 to 15. So for this image, 8 and 7 looks pretty nice. Then we look at the vibrance and saturation. So what vibrance does is that it increases the saturation of the colors that are not already saturated, while saturation just increases saturation of everything. So I rarely touch the saturation because it gives a very artificial look to the image. I always go with the vibrance slider. So for landscape images, similarly, I go for around 7 to 15, and it's just all by look. So I have a look at it. And I think around 8 to 10 is a good place to stop. So I'll just go plus 9. I think that's a very good place. So after I've done that, I think I'm very happy with the image. It looks very nice. You got the clear skies, you got your foreground clearly, and so I'll show you a before and after. So this is the image that we've just finished, and this is the previous image. As you can see, it's a quite big difference. The sky was gone, the foreground was very dark, and it's a very big difference, and it took me a few minutes just to edit it. And I'll show you how quickly you can actually do it by this image here. So this was taken by Nishant in his tutorial, one of his pictures he took. So I'm going to show you how to edit this one. First of all, look at the composition. Am I happy with the image? Yep, it looks fine. Look at my histogram. We can see that it's very dark in the foreground. And so I need to fix that in my adjustments. Go to Enable Profile Correction. It removes the distortion and also the vignetting. Remove chromatic aberration. Do that all the time. Then go into exposure. I personally think the exposure is fine, so I'm going to use the highlights and shadows to fix the image up. So as I said, usually go to 100, but in this one, we can see that there's a bit of information loss at 100. So I'm going to move it down to maybe 78 to 65, and I think that's better. It looks much more natural. For shadows, I'm going to move it all the way to 100, get the foreground up, and then whites and blacks. Control-Shift, technical adjustment, Control-Shift, technical adjustment for blacks, or alternatively, you can do the Alt and moving the cursor around like this. So a bit of clipping is good. That's good for blacks. Then presence, we look at clarity and dehaze, so around 5 to 15. So let's say 8 clarity looks good here, and then 8 for dehaze looks good as well. Vibrance, 5 to 15 as usual. So around 7, that looks very nice. So let's look at the before and after. It took me, what, about 2 minutes to finish this? So this is the before image. So you can see the foreground is completely gone. You can't see any detail. You can see the bright sky, but there's not much detail here, which I fixed up with my edit. As we can see here, it's much more clear, much more sharp. You can see the foreground. You can see the details in the sky and the sunset. It's a much better image. Now, Nishan was also mentioning the aspect of using a large f-stop number, so you can get as much detail of the image as possible. But one of the issues that you face by using a large f-stop number is that you get amplification of dust on your sensor or your lenses. But don't worry, this is a very easy issue to fix. So I'm just going to zoom into the image, go to my develop module, and then I'm going to go to my spot removal tool, which is here. I want to be on the heel setting. I want a bit of feathering. So feathering is just basically how much of the outside that goes concentrated to less concentrated. So around 50 is good. Opacity is basically how much concentration of the effect you're going to put on. So I like to put it at 100, and size is depending on how big your spot is. So I'm going to concentrate it right here and just click, and it's gone. I'm going to so this is a bit bigger of a spot, so I'm going to increase my size. I want the middle circle to be in position. Click, and it's completely gone. So press done, zoom out. As we can see, you can't see the spots anymore. So before, the spots were there. After, spots have disappeared. So that's, a very quick and easy way to fix up spot removals and dust on the sensor or your lens, especially for landscape photography. Now, Anson was speaking about panoramas. So panoramas are a very great way of taking wide-angle landscape shots. The benefits of panoramas, as opposed to using like a wide-angle lens, is that in panoramas you're actually taking like 4 images in this example here. So you're actually taking these images, which means that, let's say you have a 12 megapixel camera. This is 12 megapixels. You add another 12, 24, 36. You have a 48 megapixel image at the end, which is much better than taking a 12 megapixel wide angle image. So that's a benefit of doing panoramas. And Anson explained to you in the tutorial about overlapping. So in this example, we can see that this is the first image. And then when we go into the second image, you're going to see that this portion here is going to be in the second image. And this portion is going to be 1/3 of it's going to be removed. So we see here, this portion here is there. In the next image, we're going to see the opera house gone, but still the right side of the opera house still being there, as you can see here. And then the city portion will be gone, but still the right side will be there. So this is overlapping to ensure that the software has enough information to create a panorama. So we go back to our library module, we press Control, we select all the images that we want, then we right click, then we go to photo merge, and then we click panorama. So what Lightroom is doing here is that they're creating a panorama for you. There's different perspectives you can build, so a spherical, cylindrical, and then just a normal, and then this one the Lightroom cannot detect. So it just depends on the type of panorama you're taking. You can use auto crop for Lightroom to automatically crop it for you, or you can do it yourself. You can add automatic editing settings. So this is Lightroom's suggestion of what the edit should be, but you can do that yourself. And you can also fill in the edges as well, if there's any spaces left. But in this image, this is not an issue. So the final result after doing all the merging is something similar to this. And like any other photo, what we can do is we can do a lot of the editing aspects. So for example, this image is a bit too bright. I can move it down here, just like a normal image. So that's great about panoramas. So the next thing I want to talk about is HDR images. Now, in modern phones nowadays, you have a setting called HDR, which basically means that the phone camera is actually taking a few images and combining all the detail for you. But modern cameras aren't as smart as smartphones, so you have to do this yourself. So what HDR basically what you're going to do is you're going to take a normal exposure image, something like this. Here, the issue with what's the issue with the picture is that the sky is completely gone because of sunset, and the foreground is in correct exposure. So this is the correct exposure. Then I want to go 2 stops down and then 1 stop down. When you go 2 stops down, you preserve the sky, but your foreground is gone. If you go 1 stop down, your foreground is, you can see it, but it's not clear. Your sky, you can see it, but it's not clear. So after you've taken those images, so your normal exposure plus minusing a stop and 2 stops, you select all the images, you right click again, you go to photo merge, then you click HDR, and Lightroom will do the HDR for you. And to save time, I've already done the HDR, and you can see it's such a big difference. You have the foreground, which is clear and the exposure is fine. You can see the details in the sunset, you can see the rays, you can see the orange across the horizon, and you can see the clear blue sky, and you can see the sunset, in full focus. And that's why HDR image is a great way for you to fix dynamic range issues where your sky is gone but the foreground is there, or when you can see a bit of the foreground. Sorry, when you can see the foreground but sky is gone, or you can see the sky but the foreground is gone. So those are some tips that are very useful in landscape photography. So if anyone has any questions, they're more than welcome to ask, and then we'll finish off the tutorial if there isn't anything else to discuss.
All right. Thank you, Shadaf, for your parts of demonstration. And now, if you have any question, feel free to comment there. We are watching it right now, and we'll be answering your questions. Make sure that you go to follow our Facebook and Instagram page as well. All right, I think it's just time to wrap up this landscape photography tutorial. And as always, if you have any questions or you would like to join us, go on our Facebook and IG and check it out. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching our tutorial this week. We hope to see you somewhere on the campus, and stay safe. Goodbye.